There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Mona Mostatabi is the Communications Director at the National Iranian American Council here in Washington. With us from Connecticut is Iranian American journalist and author Roya Hakakayan. Her memoir, Journey from the Land of No, focuses on growing up as a Jewish teenager in post-revolutionary Iran. Muqtada Khan founded the University of Delaware's Islamic Studies program, where he serves as a professor of political science and international relations. And joining us via Skype is Professor Nasser Hadian. He teaches law and political science at the University of Tehran. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Let's start in Tehran with Nasser Hadian. Nasser, the Iranian Revolution, we're commemorating that 40 years later. It overthrew what many people believed was a despotic monarch and ushered in the Islamic State. Over the last 40 years, if you look at it, how has Iran changed? What are the paramount achievements of this revolution?
Of course, we have witnessed a lot of changes almost in every aspect of life: social, political, economic, foreign policy, just name it. So Iran is no longer the same as before. But I don't want to say that there is no continuity. Of course, there are a lot of continuities at the very deep level, at all of the aspects which I mentioned. But if I want to assess the achievements and the failures of the revolution, I can say basically in terms of political freedom, we have more of it now. Of course, far from being what we desired or what we thought of, but still better than before. In terms of social freedom, I can say it was better before the revolution. And economic-wise, standard of living was better before, but still the achievements which we have now in terms of being able to produce many things by ourselves, sort of a self-confidence which we have on our own abilities to produce ourselves. So it's better now. And in terms of the foreign policy, we can see a lot of changes. So there are a lot of debates inside Iran regarding the orientation of our foreign policy, which I guess I'm better off to wait until the next round. But if I have time, I will be more than glad to address it now.
Yes, we will get to foreign policy a little bit later in the show, but let me go to Muqtada Khan here in the studio. When we look at this Iranian revolution, you have written of what you call the demonstration effect of the revolution and the impact that it's had on other Arab countries, other Muslim majority countries. Explain that to us, and will that perhaps be one of the enduring legacies of this revolution?
Well, one of the things that the Iranian Revolution has achieved is to demonstrate that you can establish an Islamic state. It is partly democratic, so it also demonstrates that democracy and Islam can perhaps coexist. The Iranian government has been an inspiration for political Islam. They have always dreamed of having a Khilafah or an Islamic state of some kind, and now they have an example in front of them. It just happens to be Shia, so it's not exactly replicable in the Sunni world, but still it does inspire. And in the 80s, most Islamis all over the world were very excited about Iran's revolution and thought that it would spread. Iran also gave empirical reality to what people, as scholars talked about, as so-called Islamic foreign policy. For example, Jerusalem Day is celebrated only in Iran and not other Muslim countries. Iran is now in some ways, the biggest advocate for the Palestinian cause, as Arabs continue to abandon the Palestinian cause. And most importantly, Iran demonstrated not just to the Muslim world, but also to third world countries, that you can resist Western domination. And you can even be a counter-hegemonic state and survive. Yes, the price is very high. Iran could have been a state like South Korea, a middle power now, if it was aligned with the US, but it would have been less democratic, more aligned. What is ironic is that Iran became democratic by moving away from the US. And Iran was a democracy in '53. Yeah. We replaced it with a monarchy. So being friendly with the United States meant that wealth was not well distributed. Only a few elite benefited from oil wealth. Now Iran at home also shows that wealth is much better distributed. Even the condition of women under the Islamic rule is much better than it was under the monarchy. So they have an advantage. They say, look, an Islamic state can do wonderful. And anything that is negative about it, they are fortunate enough to blame the US for it.
Right. Roya Hakakian, we've already heard a range of views on this Iranian Revolution. Your memoir, Journey from the Land of No, it covers your life in Iran as a young Jewish girl before and after the revolution. What do you make of the revolution so far?
Well, I think I want to at least say that I disagree with everything that the previous commentator said. And as for Professor Hadian, I think he's correct that much has changed, but I'd like to add to that all of the change has been for the worst. I was a little girl in Iran in 1979 at this very time, and I was both excited and terrified. I was excited by the idea that this revolution was going to bring everything that Iranian modern poetry had promised us: liberty, freedom of expression, and much that, to my childhood imagination, had been kept from us as a nation. And of course, it took only 3 years to realize, even for me, as I was a teenager, that none of that had happened or was going to happen. And I think the rest of the nation has come to that conclusion by now, for sure.
Roya, you say you disagree with most of what Muqtada Khan had said, but he also did point out that Iran was a monarchy, at least was a democracy in 1953, when the United States overthrew that democracy.
Right. That's a very popular notion that has been peddled in the United States. And of course, Americans embrace this because Americans would like to believe that they're the center of the universe. And if they send their CIA to a country far away on the other side of the ocean, with just a tiny bit of intervention, they can undo a civilization's history or democracy, which is not true. There have been many books written on the subject of the coup in 1953, the most recent of which, and the best of them, is Iran and the CIA by a professor in Switzerland called Dariush Bayandor, which closely looks at the incident in 1953 and shows that, number one, Iran was not a democracy. Iran was a monarchy that approved of the prime minister by the Shah to be appointed to the prime ministership at the time. And had it not been for the collaboration of the Iranian clergy in 1953 with the CIA would have never achieved what it achieved in 1953.
All right,
so what we have reaped is with the intervention of our own clergy who eventually came to power.
Okay, Muqtada, I'm going to give you a chance to very quickly respond to that.
Well, she first denied that there was any CIA collusion and then blames clergy's cooperation with the CIA for the success.
No, there was a CIA. But the first
Okay, one moment. I'll get back to you. Muqtada, go ahead.
The fact, even the CIA's declassified documents now acknowledge its role in the revolution or the coup that replaced monarchy, democracy with monarchy in Iran. But what is interesting is it is the success in 1953 which today prompts people like John Bolton and Pompeo think that we can do this in Iran again. We can bring about regime change in Iran again because we did it so easily in the past. We just need a weak economy and we need some external pressure. And that was the situation in the 50s. And that is an indication that the US is consistently interested in bringing a government in Tehran which is aligned with US national interests.
All right, Mona, if we look at...
this would be precisely the interpretation of a professor who believes that Iran is a democracy and women in Iran are happier today. Leave it to a man who does not live in Iran to assess that women are better off today than they were before. And because the professor believes that Iran is an Islamic democracy, it is that he has to also say and completely eliminate the role that the Iranian clergy played in 1953 to bring down the prime minister's
Mona, we've heard very divergent opinions here. What's your view?
Look, I think something that is missing is this conversation around this emerging generation. Folks my age who were born after the revolution or who don't remember it happening at all, they're very divorced from the ideology that drove that revolution in the first place. That revolution hinged on independence, and a lot of the same problems that you saw under the Shah were just kind of retranslated into various forms under the current regime. But the reality is you have, essentially what amounts to Iranian millennials coming of age, highly educated, with no economic opportunities. So what the revolution has given them is nothing.
You know, talking about economic opportunity, there were demonstrations in 2017, 2018 against the troubled economy in Iran. The last 4 decades, I think we can safely say, have been marked by Iran coming under some kind of pressure all the time. There wasn't a time when it wasn't under some kind of sanctions, especially from the United States. What impact has that had on the country?
Well, it essentially leaves Iran in sort of the state of arrested development. There's no reason for a country that has such immense natural and resources, such a highly educated population, to be in the sort of flailing economic state that it is. And what's interesting to see is that now, years later, you're having these conversations for the first time where the straw man set up by the regime to blame the United States for all the pressure is actually being questioned by the Iranian population. And they're looking at, well, there's widespread corruption, there's mismanagement in the government, not only in terms of the economy, but in terms of land and water management. You're seeing this discussion broaden in a lot of ways that we haven't seen before.
All right, let me go back to Tehran, to Nessa Hadian. Nessa, Iran has been able to some extent to withstand these punishing sanctions over the last 40 years. It also survived that disastrous war with Iraq, and it continues to face threats from the United States. That's a sort of resilience that the country has. What holds it together?
A number of factors domestically and internationally would contribute basically to keeping the society together, regardless of the hardship, the problems, the differences, and the conflicts and the cleavages, social cleavages which exist. Yes, there are a lot of disagreement. Yes, there are a lot of discontent. But I still, as I've already mentioned in different interviews, basically still people prefer to reform. They don't want to bring down the regime. And the government in Tehran is in charge. And the people, as I mentioned, because of the historical factors, because of the cultural factors, and because when they look at around Iran, they see the instability and insecurity in those places. So they don't want basically another revolution. They think that through reform, we can achieve our objectives better. In the last 100, 150 years, we have tried a number of times to go for a shortcut to achieve our objectives of independence, freedom, and prosperity. But unfortunately, almost at every one of them, we ended up to be worse off than before. Right. So we have learned a lesson. We don't want to try the same thing again. And I would like also to mention that the nature of polity space in Iran is very much a contested one. So people are debating, people are quarreling about the nature of this space, and nothing to me is determined that, okay, this is going to remain the case. But what I can say universally accepted in Iran, they don't want a foreign intervention in the form of military or economic intervention, right, particularly by Trump administration. That's absolute majority of Iranians. They don't want it. They think that's not going to help us. It has not helped Afghanistan. It has not helped Iraq. It has not helped Libya. It has not helped Syria. And they don't want to see another war.
Yeah.
They don't want to see another intervention by the power like the United States, particularly Trump administration.
Okay, go ahead, Mukhtar.
I just quickly want to add that Iran's domestic economic woes are essentially the price of its radical foreign policy, especially its opposition to U.S. interests in the region. Right. But if you look at Iran's economy 2 years ago, on the World Bank data, it was growing at 4%. And now it's in negative growth. It is predicted to go minus 3% next year. Right. And these are the direct consequences of the sanctions. But in spite of all the sanctions in the last 20, 30 years, which have essentially diminished Iran's potential, the Iranian people have stayed with the regime. They have wanted reforms, they have wanted more social freedoms, but they have not wanted a transformation that they sought in 1979 9. And that is a very remarkable achievement for this regime, whether you agree with it or not, that it does have, that they don't want to see it thrown out. And I think that the United States has shown tremendous understanding towards Russia. In accommodation, we are accommodating North Korea, and we are willing to accommodate the interests of other countries, like even India. And I think the U.S., rather than adopting an all-or-nothing approach, can actually negotiate with the Iranian regime as it is negotiating with the North Koreans.
Well, it did negotiate with the Iranian regime. There was that brief period of rapprochement under the Obama administration when they signed the nuclear deal. Of course, President Trump abandoned that deal when he came to office.
Well, in that treaty, the whole world, I mean, the entire European partners, China, Russia, and Iran, are all abiding by the treaty. We have, in a sense, violated the treaty by unilaterally withdrawing. So it is our credibility that is diminished by our withdrawal. However, I think it is incumbent on the Trump administration to give Iran the same consideration that it is giving North Korea and Russia. Russia is in Ukraine. Russia is behaving far more erratically and radically than Iran. And I think that the Iranian regime would play ball because, yes, ultimately they are suffering. They can see the suffering of their people. But they are also under pressure by this isolation of Iran in its own region, in the Middle East.
Roy, I want to get your opinion on this. I mean, we've just heard from two of our panelists telling us here that despite
I can confidently tell you that I disagree with everything that the previous speakers said.
Okay, but just to the let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, to the point where we've heard our panelists tell us that despite the Iranian government's faults, its shortcomings, after 40 years of Islamic rule, that people largely accept that government. There is no desire to change the government.
No, of course not. I mean, that's your definition. It's not a shortcoming. This government has committed grave sins against its own people. This government has basically annihilated and driven into the shadows a community called the Baha'i community. This is a minority that existed, that came into being in Iran, and whose children cannot educate themselves by merely being Baha'i. By calling these grave acts in Iran, that have been committed by the government of Iran as merely shortcomings, you are really downplaying the gravity of everything that has happened. Women are on the streets of Iran protesting on a daily basis. If you don't believe me, you can check on Instagram, on social media. You can see there are several campaigns called White Wednesdays, Girls of the Revolution Streets. These are women who on a daily basis come out, take the hijab off, and believe that they want to have freedom of choice. So I have no idea where the notion of an Islamic democracy comes into being here, because there is no democracy. Democracy comes with the notion of
I'll get you in a moment.
at its foundation. And there is
we
no
have
choice
women protesting in the
and
U.S. every day against Trump. Women's march all the time. Women are protesting against the discrimination against women. So just the presence of women protests does not fully indicate that women are being. The fact that they can
one at a time, please. Sorry, I want to get to Mona. Let me ask you for your opinion on this. How stable is the Iranian theocracy? I mean, what kind of opposition does the leadership in Iran face?
So part of the problem is that there's no real unified opposition in Iran. Their grievances are as diverse as the democracies themselves. You have labor protests, you have environmental activists, you have women's rights activists, as has been noted. How stable are they? I'm not sure. I think that if the U.S. goal is to undermine this regime, then withdrawing from the JCPOA probably wasn't the best way to do it. All that it's done is it's strengthened the hardliners, it's weakened the moderates. Rouhani's rhetoric has been pushed more to the right. There's not a lot of evaluation here that was done, I think.
Well, not just that, not just withdrawing from the nuclear agreement. I'll get to you in a moment, Nessa. We just heard last year the U.S. National Security Advisor, John Bolton, asking the U.S. Department of Defense to look at options for a military strike against Iran.
Right. You also have John Bolton, who's accepted thousands of dollars from so-called the legitimate Iranian opposition and the MEK. So all of these people are very agenda-driven. They aren't really out for the Iranian people. Anything they say is lip service. I wouldn't put much stock in any of that.
Right, go ahead, Nasser. You want to say something?
Yes, I fully agree with Mona's point regarding the JCPOA. And I think it has, because many of us in Iran supported the JCPOA, put our credibility on the line in support of that. And unfortunately, what Trump administration did basically diminished our credibility. It's number one. Regarding Roya Khanum's point about Baha'is, I fully agree with her. Unfortunately, there are a lot of discrimination, particularly about the religious minorities. And I would like to specifically separate the Baha'is from the others. Although there are discriminations about the Jews, about the Christians, and the Zoroastrians enshrined in the constitution of Iran, but Baha'is' case is fundamentally different even from them. So, but my point is, how do we want to address that? You know, how we want to achieve a society which is not based, or the decisions are not based, or appointments, promotions, employments, right, just name it, are based on religion. How do we want to get there? That's my point. So that's why when I said that polity is contested, that's exactly what I meant. We are debating about the nature of the polity. Yeah. And to achieve those objectives, which, as I said, that I would like to see an egalitarian society. Yes. I've lived many years in the US, from my younghood all the way. So that's not the type of society which I would like to see, because of also a lot of inequality which I saw there. So certainly that's the case in Iran too. But my point is, how do we want to get there? Yeah. That's the way we are debating, not the goals. Okay,
Muqtada Khan, I have to talk about one key event in this relationship between the United States and Iran, and that is, I mean, this event that really shaped their relationship was the storming of the U.S. Embassy in November 1979. 52 Americans and citizens, American diplomats and citizens, held hostage for 444 days. How did that incident define the relationship over the last 40 years?
Well, at least in the West, it created an image of Iran as a radical regime, and the fact that Khomeini allowed that to go on and on for an extended period of time, that if you missed one show about it, you caught the next one. So yes, it also shaped to a great extent the popular perceptions of American population towards Iran as a regime that will target civilians, as a regime that will target, and that played in very well once Iran produced and created Hezbollah and started deploying Hezbollah and other tactics across Europe, even killing dissidents, etc. So nobody's saying that Iran has not indulged in despicable activities. But the real question is that how does the United States now deal with arguments such as Roya's are essentially have one end, which is that we precipitate some kind of a regime change in Iran. And we saw what we did in Iraq, and military intervention in Iraq led to the creation of ISIS and displacement of millions of populations in Iraq, Syria. And Iran is going to be even a bigger disaster if we were to go. And I can tell you that any military intervention from the United States will actually have a rallying effect on the population. And you saw how they fought Iraq for 8 years, and you will have that kind of a situation. The chances that JCPOA had opened was that it allowed us to dangle the carrot of full acceptance in the international community based on reforms. And Iran has fulfilled its objectives as JCPOA. It hasn't modified any of its other foreign policy goals, such as its interventions in Syria, Yemen, its threats to Israel, etc. But I think that it is important for the United States to realize that the days when we could bully countries into changing their fundamental nature are over, and it is time for us to try and manage change in those countries. And I think Iran could become a much more stabler and much more tolerant democracy in partnership with the U.S. rather than in hostility with the U.S.
I've got to go. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.